Hello everyone and welcome to our special coverage of Nigeria's brand new Democracy Day. It is now law and June 12 is Nigeria's new Democracy Day and it was marked in the nation's capital Abuja. It was not a low-key celebration at all. It was with the fanfare in the color and shape of a national event. Some world leaders were present and President Momodu Buhari gave a speech laden with promises, assurances and hope for a better future for Nigeria. Take a listen to a portion of what the president said today.
Our country, Nigeria, is a great country. We possess all the ingredients of a major economic power on the world stage. What we require is the will to get our acts together, and our strength is in our people, our youth, our culture, our resilience, our ability to succeed despite the odds. A huge responsibility before rests on this and succeeding administration to develop, harness, and fulfill our enormous potential into force to be reckoned with globally. Thus far, we Nigerians can be proud of our history since independence in 1960. We have contributed to United Nations peacekeeping responsibilities all over the world. We have stabilized Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ivory Coast, and 2 years ago, we prevented the Gambia from degenerating into anarchy.
Well, tonight, we are celebrating Nigeria's democratic practice, and there were some prominent figures about 26 years ago, some of those who fought and almost lost their lives in the struggle for what is being celebrated today as June 12 presidential election, perhaps what they refer to or are judged as perhaps the fairest and the fairest elections in Nigeria's history. The hopes of that election re-echoes again, and the hopes of a better Nigeria is now up in the air. On this special edition of the program, we shall take you on a ride, hoping to give you a sense of duty and projection to what Nigeria needs to look like. My guests tonight, some of those who played active roles in that struggle of June 12. And tonight, we probably will not be dwelling too much on the past. We'll talk a bit of the past and we'll go into the future. Yes, that is what we need as a nation. I have with me Chief Dele Momodu, a publisher, a writer, and a media entrepreneur. He's a pro-democracy activist. He was in the middle of all the struggle on the June 12. Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you, Shehu.
All right. And I also have with me in our Abuja studio is a governor now, governor of Ekiti State, and the chairman of the Nigeria's Governors Forum, Dr. Fayemi, is also in the midst of all of the struggle at a time, at some point, hovering around the world, trying to hide from the military at the time. Thank you so much, Dr. Fayemi, for coming on tonight. Let me begin with you, Chief.
Thank you for having me, Shehu.
Absolutely. Let me begin with you, Chief Momodu. How does this day come to you? If you remember some of those things that happened, especially when we look at the manifesto of Hope 93, the SDP presidential candidate, and what SDP said they wanted to do should they win that election.
It's a day of mixed feeling. First, sadness that we had a very beautiful election won by a very beautiful soul, Chief Moshood Abiola, the presidential election of June 12, 1993. But it's also a day of joy that President Muhammadu Buhari has gone beyond the other people who came ahead of him, and he has recognized that watershed date. He has recognized the winner. Practically, it's as good as saying, yes, he was a president-elect, it's just that he didn't take power. So we're very delighted that Abiola did not die in vain, that the other martyrs did not die in vain, that those of us who had to abandon our families back home, that we didn't do all that in vain. Because there are times you just feel lost, that, hey, how do you have a nation without heroes? How do you have a nation without gratitude? It helps to heal the wounds when someone comes up to say, okay, there was a mistake and we're ready to correct it.
Interestingly, I have yourself and Dr. Fayemi, some of you who played a role in the radio Kudrat. At the time, a popular radio room, we did not know where it was functioning from or where it was broadcasting from, but it was a bone in the neck for the military junta at the time. The likes of Richard Dyer Johnson were also in the forefront, broadcasting in pseudonyms and all of that. But today, remembering what happened at the time, what exactly, for those who were not born 26 years ago and are watching right now, for a sense of history, how close were you to Bashorun MK Abiola, and what were your specific roles at the time? Okay,
let me start from the rear by saying that I want to salute the effort of Dr. Fayemi in particular for the role he played in Radio Kudrat. He was the main man behind that radio. My own operation was very small. I was restricted to broadcasting the Yoruba version because we needed to reach out to people in different languages. My pseudonym at that time was Sali Welenugboro, Eni Olorun Opa. And I mean, technology played effective role because we were doing everything by telephone. I never knew where we were broadcasting from. I would just be in my office. They call me 10 minutes to go, get ready, and I have my script ready, and we just spill it out in Yoruba. But someone like Dr. Fayemi, I mean, to coordinate such a humongous project at that time when the toughest military in Africa was after your life. I mean, we must salute his courage. There were many other people. You already mentioned Richard Dyer Johnson, George Noah, and we had a few engineers working on the project at the time. So that, for me, was my own contribution. But like I said, I didn't consider it any big deal because Chief Abiola had publicly recognized me as an adopted son. And so what a father expects of his child is to watch his back, is to support him in the days of tribulations. And that was exactly what we did.
Interesting. It's safe to tell us now where you were, because at the time it was not safe to tell anybody where you were going, where you were sleeping, and where were you basically? Were you in Lagos or where were you?
Okay, my own trouble started on 22nd July 1995. I'd gone to see Chief Segun Oshoba, who was one of the people, I mean, fighting for democracy at the time.
He was the governor at the time?
Yes, so I was coming from his place, and he told me that, hey, you guys should be very, very careful. I didn't know what was going to happen. On my way home, then I met my dear wife, and she said she was praying that I won't get home before she finds me, because some people had gone to tip her off early in the morning that I was on the watch list of the Abachas and that I needed to disappear. So I went straight into what I would call a bunker, somewhere in Kafi Street, very close to Alausa. My friends, the Orol Gbagbes, had a place there, and that was where I was hiding and planning my exit. I never planned in my life to leave as a Nigeria.
So you went on exile?
So I had to go on exile. But before then, of course, you had to plan. Fortunately, I had my visa and my passport. And then by 25th July, I was ready for the journey. I had called Tokunbo Afikuyomi in London. They had gone before me. So because you must speak to those who already had the experience to know the routes to navigate. And so we had to meander through the bush into Cotonou, from Cotonou to Togo, from Togo to Ghana, and from Ghana to the UK.
Interesting scenario. Yeah. A form of kind of nostalgia on a day like this. And I wanted us to talk briefly about this because it's interesting when you're narrating some of these stories. For some of us who were probably young at the time and watching from the sideline, let me quickly go to Dr. Fayemi. It's interesting to know some of the roles that you played, not only some of us who were watching and reading about it and monitoring what was happening. Dr. Fayemi, how do you feel on a day like this, especially for a government or a junta you fought so hard, and you use a tool of the media to fight also. You were in the forefront on a day like this when that struggle is being celebrated and now marked as a Democracy Day. How do you feel?
Thank you, Sheon. Let me also extend thanks to Saliu and Opa. I'm glad that he finally came out with his name those days. For those who may not know, he was the broadcaster in Yoruba News. I feel a bit emotional about it. I see it as a culmination of a struggle that started way back in 1993, because we were very clear that that election was won fair and square by Chief MKO Abiola and Alhaji Babagana Kingibe, and that they ought to have been declared victorious in the election and sworn in as the president and vice president of Nigeria. That struggle had been on even after we lost Chief Abiola, and we lost so many who paid the supreme price for the struggle for freedom and democracy in Nigeria, that it took President Buhari, who, as many of you may know, was not exactly Chief Abiola's friend, given the alleged role Chief Abiola played in the coup of 1983, to have been the one who made this possible. And I am proud to be associated with him as someone who served in his government as a minister and who is a member of his party. I see it as a culmination. But you see, what's also important about it, unfortunately for us, anyone who is 30 years today, Sheon, and at least 70% of our population are under 30, may not have really understood the whole Olabalu of June 12. And when you add that to the fact that history had been off our syllabus in Nigeria until the Buhari administration restored history to that syllabus, you can understand the nostalgia, the sense of gratitude that some of us would have for the role that God has used President Buhari to play in the democratization process in our country. But it also speaks to what we really must not neglect. History provides a pathway for the future. We must not go back to that problem, no matter how imperfect our democratization process is. We used to call this civilian rule rather than democracy. There are still those who feel that what we have is a reconfiguration of our politics rather than a democratization of the space. Whatever it is, we have moved from where we were, and I think we need to continue. Democracy is not a linear journey, and it's not really a destination, it's a journey. But that journey is full of bends, undulating lands, stasis, progress, but it's so important that we must continue on the journey in order to deepen this process. So for me, it's not so much important the role that individuals played. Yes, we played what some might consider aimless boldness. In those times, I was only 28 years old, young PhD, living outside the country, but very passionate, not necessarily about Chief Abiola. I don't have the kind of relationship that my brother Dele Momodu had with Chief Abiola. I wasn't even a great fan of Chief Abiola because I thought he was, in our own language, in the socialist movement, then he was just a part of the comprador elite. He was a bourgeoisie. He was one of those who made the difficult experience we were having in the country possible by aligning with the military. That was how we saw him. So the June 12th struggle for us was a struggle between a resistant civil society and a recalcitrant military dictatorship. It wasn't an NRC SDP battle for some of us. For people like Dele, who was quite close to Chief Abiola, it was a different thing. But I must say that the manifesto Farewell to Poverty resonated strongly with a lot of our people. So it was a generational struggle, and I'm glad to have played a little role in that struggle.
All right, I would draw you out a bit, and I know you try as much as possible to hide talking about Radio Kudrat and your modus operandi at the time. But now it's safe to talk about it because there is no military that is running after you at the time. At this time. So tell us, how were you able to do it? Because I understand at some point you were operating at the airport, at some point you were operating at the borders of the country. Where were you exactly, and what kind of equipment were you using to operate Radio Kudrat that was a bit elusive and invasive to the military junta?
Well, Sheung, first and foremost, let me say that there is nothing irreversible about democratization. We're not praying for it. We will continue to struggle that we don't lose this democracy. But when you see what has just happened in countries like Egypt, even in Sudan, we will fight the military. We don't want a return to the military because we saw what happened in our country. So don't let me release all of those ammunitions that we utilized in that struggle to the public. However, what is important, and I think it's important to say that because you had the likes of Brigadier General Fred Chijuka, Walter Ofonagoro, Wadanas. I recall how I was declared persona non grata and I was accused of treasonable felony because I was running a radio that was broadcasting about democracy and, in a sense, saving lives. So I do not want to make light of how some of the people involved at that time saw it. But however, it was a technical operation. Many people were involved in it. We had various phases of the operation. The earlier phase was operated close to the country and inside the country sometime, but that was more of an FM station that didn't have reach. But by the time the likes of Dele joined the operation, we were broadcasting on a shortwave radio and beaming our broadcast into the country. And we had excellent engineers and producers. The late Yinka Johnson, you may not know him. He was a veteran from the WNTV, WNBS day, was one of our leading technical crew. Lemi Olalemi, who is a very senior figure in TVC now, was also one of the technical members. We had others, and then of course Dele already mentioned Richard Dyer Johnson. He mentioned George Noah. Of course, he didn't mention my late friend Tajuddin Abdurrahim, who anchored the Hausa broadcast and also risked his life and the life of his family members in Funtua because it was more unpardonable for him
were you part of,
to have been part of the...
do you have a pseudonym? Was your voice on air at the time too?
Well, surprisingly, I was never really a broadcaster on Radio Kudrat. I was a backroom operator.
Oh, interesting. Maybe we should talk about the spirit of what happened at the time. A lot of people believe that. A lot of dynamics were messed up in terms of how our politics play out in Nigeria. The issues of ethnicity, the issue of what religion play in Nigeria politics. It was messed up totally in 1993. And let me begin with you, Chief Dele Momodu. We had a Muslim ticket. We had a Yoruba man who won landslide in Kano State, the home state of the NRC candidate Bashir Tofa. That election and the outcome of it, it messed up some of the calculations, politically speaking, in present-day Nigeria. What was the spirit like at the time?
Well, the way I like to put it is that a lot of people always feel that it just happened by accident. No. Chief Moshood Abiola had worked carefully, meticulously for it. He was able to touch every part of Nigeria to the extent that he felt at home and the people welcomed him. So, for anybody to do that today is going to take a lot of effort. Because one, you don't have too many employers like Abiola, who in his company, he didn't mind where you came from. We had a lot of guys from the north. You will hear of Yakubu Muhammad. You will hear of Tombora. You will hear of Stanley Egbochukwu. You will hear of Insikak Essien. I mean, how do you have that kind of spread in any company today? It's quite tough. Then here was a man who was a staunch Muslim, but attended Baptist Boys High School, Abeokuta. So he had a Christian upbringing. On the day of my wedding, he came and my wife was handed over to him. This man was singing, you know, that was Abiola for you. So he was at home with Christians, he was at home with Muslims. He could quote his Quran and quote his Bible, you know, with equal competence. It is difficult today because some people felt in their wisdom or stupidity that Nigeria didn't need an Abiola. I think it was more of a personal issue between the elites, and they just wasted Nigeria from that moment on. I am hoping, and this is, you know, when you say we should look forward, I am hoping that the government of today, beyond naming the stadium after Abiola, beyond declaring the public holiday, I'm hoping that they will also be able to unite Nigeria.
Do you see President Buhari as that kind of person that can unite Nigeria?
Well, I'm not Dr. Fayemi, who would swear by that. I'm not that close to him. I've met him a couple of times, but I'm not convinced, especially today. What I expected today in Abuja was a unification process. I would have expected to see even some of the opposition leaders. I'm sure, I don't know if they were invited, but I'm sure if they were invited, a lot of them would have come there today. That must happen. In fact, immediately after the June 12th crisis started, people were already clamoring for government of national unity, and that's why when the interim government came, people were a bit disappointed that it didn't live up to expectation. So I'm hoping that people like Dr. Kayode Fayemi, who have been in the system and who are also part of pro-democracy, will be able to address this and be able to advise their government on the way forward, because they stand to gain a lot. Nigeria stands to gain a lot. It does
look like, Chief Dele Momodu, you don't believe that there are strong democratic tendency with this Buhari government.
I see Buhari government as more pro-military than pro-democracy. That is my opinion.
What makes you think so?
Oh, a lot of things. When you see an executive arm that seeks to control everything, executive controls the executive controls judiciary, controls legislature, controls the media, that is military.
And that gives you a lot of concern.
Yeah.
And you think that is a bit attractive to a dictatorial tendency?
Oh, definitely. No, I mean, absolute,
but when the president said
absolute power, as they say, control, it creates absolute dictatorship. Once you have a man who has that proclivity for, yes, we must control, I'm a control freak. Look, the day this June 12th thing was addressed by Buhari, everybody hailed it. Even those of us who were grumbling, the so-called whalers, we all came out and said, yes, the president has. If I was Buhari, I would have seized on that moment, continue to bring people together. You will see that even the issue of Boko Haram, the issue of headsmen or whatever you call them, you will be able to address it better. The unification of Nigeria, for me, is more important even than the issue of we want economy, we want this, we want that. I'm telling you, until you unite Nigeria, there will be no peace, there will be no progress.